Set my timer. Oh, wait. Is my voice audible?
Yeah, audible.
Okay, got it. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Systemic inequality has its roots in every woman of the country. However, inequality is not created equally. We believe that acknowledging this creates the change that feminists need to succeed. I will bring two arguments in my debate. First of all, on how intersectionality in feminism creates a better understanding for the feminist society from outside perspective, and two, how in turn that creates uh, be tangible benefits for the objective of the feminist movement in the very first place. But before that, it's important to clarify some things in this debate. First of all, feminist movements clearly have a lot of goals in mind. That they might not all be the same, but in general, they are to secure women's rights, advocate for women's well-being, and equality of opportunities. However, this general term that we've heard so far so much about isn't equal in its own way. Women's rights might boil down to basic rights that haven't been fulfilled, but also more specific rights for some specific group of people. And how on equality of opportunities might come from different backgrounds. Equality of opportunities because you're part of a certain religion or a race, or maybe you don't have the same opportunity because you're not in the right economic group. We are here to push that notion that there exists different routes for every of these problems. We have to also keep in mind that we're talking about a diverse country here. People in diverse country are, of course, have people from very different backgrounds in every single aspect, including the women itself. Many women here are not enrolling in high opportunities with a lot of ethnic, racial, and social economic background. And because of this high variety of people, there are certain groups who are against other groups, whether that's through religious reasons or ethnic reasons, that creates this misogyny or racism that goes within other groups and their borders. And third of all, of course, women are still being second guessed themselves when it comes to their abilities as a human itself, not just as who they are, but as an equal human being. So how do we actually prioritize intersectionality in this case? First of all, we push the narrative that there exists more systematic factors to gender inequality rather than just a simple umbrella term of women don't have the same rights. Push that these women are more than just a collective of people with the same vague goal, but also a more tangible, specific goal or goals that have different conditions in different groups of women. So, first argument on how intersectionality creates a better understanding for the feminist society. To give some context for this, the fact of the matter is that women across different backgrounds and different places experience inequality in different ways. Women in lower income neighborhoods face limiting gender role stereotypes, such as obligated to being housewives or maids. Women in middle class experience harsh wage gaps. Women in, for example, when it comes to religion, in Islam, are forced to abide to customs or even rules that are inherently unfair, even though they're not in a Muslim country. They still apply the Muslim law to these women, even though the majority of the country don't have the same rules. However, to give context, intersectionality acknowledges that the impact of gender inequality is not uniform, that women experience their own struggles differently from other women, which means there is no single solution to every problem women face at the same time. The impact from intersectionality is that it, one, creates a provides a clearer, divisible goal that addresses each form of inequality in its own way. With these clearer goals and acknowledgement, they can tackle the root of each problem. For example, when focusing on the women's getting exploited in their work, they create a women's labor union for women that experience work exploitation. And or another example would be pushing the inequality of women's religious rights in a country that's diverse and give them the same rights that other women have just because they're not the same religion. And second, on the impact is having different and specific goals also allow people to understand the feminist movement better. A problem with a lot of people who are currently unsure or unconvinced in supporting the feminist movement is that they don't really see much reason to it farther than just feminism and women as a whole collective group, in the same way that some certain countries see the LGBT movement as a whole collective instead of specific needs. But specifically for the feminism in this case, they don't see the much reason behind it. By acknowledging and tackling the differences of origin and background, we can provide a more digestible reason for these people to see. For example, Some people might not agree about treating women equally as a whole in the workforce, but they can understand that a certain group of women don't have the work rights they need. For example, maternity leave, equal compensation and wage, etc. Or another example would be how you won't be supporting a you won't agree that exists a wage gap for a whole collective of women, but you can understand that these people with different economic backgrounds are treated unfairly because they're desperate to get a job, and that's why the wage gap exists in that scenario. A more systemic reasoning. Or another example, a Muslim group might not want to see women have the right to drive or work in their country due to the religious reasons, but they can understand that in that country that they live in that diverse country that they live in, that the necessity for these women to be able to work and commute exists as well. Comparatively, when you only rely on communality, it doesn't provide the same clear and concise strikes to these problems. It provides a more general term for everyone. The narrative of a one single feminist movement, in turn, creates the notion that there exists a one single feminist solution, which isn't true, as it can't be one, it can't be applied to everyone. Two, even if a certain group agrees to a part of a feminist problem, it might not agree to other parts of it, and which means that it can't accept the whole collective as one. You can't accept, for example, you support women. For example, this is an example of an extreme example of religion. If you agree that women should be able to go outside to drive and wear whatever they want out in public, but you might not agree that they should equal wage pay. These people can accept one part of it instead of the whole thing, but because of the communality, they can only accept the whole thing or reject the whole thing, which in conclusion, they have to force to neglect the whole thing. Tangible acceptance is not possible with communality being the focus. Two, on how tangible benefits of feminist movement is caused by understanding. By using this intersectionality, we can create targeted campaign. Acknowledging the intersectionality means that feminist movement has an obligation to work on these problems that these women complain about too. This is better since we carry women whose problem is that they're, rather than forcing them to understand on the common ground of people that they might not relate to. Because inherently in these diverse countries, it's hard to understand each other as a whole, because it's hard to find anything else in common other than the fact that feminism is a collective for women. Sometimes you have to acknowledge that, yes, you do have things in common, but the focus should be what sets us apart as well. People have different backgrounds. You may not have to think whether or not you lose your job tomorrow. You might not think whether you put on your table when you come home. These are problems that are specific to certain groups, and it's important to acknowledge them. Without this intersectionality, on the other hand, it creates this problem that in such a diverse country with such diverse problems, we're forcing a single solution onto it. We're forcing a single movement that acknowledges women's right. Okay, the problem with this is that due to the diversity of it, it can't be applied. And for those reasons, we are proud to propose. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that speech. To open the case from opposition, we welcome Leader of Opposition here.
Hello, am I clearly audible?
Your voice is a bit muffled. I think it's a mic issue. Tell us when you're ready, yeah?
I go by she, her pronouns, and I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Before going on to my arguments, several rebuttals to the government side. Firstly, they told you that women face different issues according to their background, and there is no single solution. 3 responses here. First, basically, the case from government is as simple as, oh, women face different issues, so there is no one solution to this. But the analysis that is missing in their side is that, first, how can people understand the different issues without really establishing the common ground that people should agree and be educated upon? And second, how can people understand the urgency of the diverse issues that government trying to apply here? And second response, the problem with this is that first, people tend to be confused due to them being flooded with diverse issues because there is no common standing ground that they should fight upon. And second, the impact to the women themselves is that women won't have significant change due to them not being able to collectivize with the same standing metric. This is something that opposition is trying to propose here. And third response, comparatively on our side, commonality establishes an equal ground for people to at least understand and be aware. Because the problem with this country is that it is not highly unified. So their claim on how women want to relate is just false because the commonalities translates to the basic problem that they face. Things like discrimination, sexual assault is something that is commonly and generally faced by women in this diverse country. And secondly, they told you that having different groups make people understand feminist movement better because the communities think women as a whole. And intersectionality is better because then the feminist women will reach the feminist movement will reach all kinds of problems. We think that instead of creating better understanding, people will instead getting confused due to the fact that they are flooded by diverse issues that they don't even understand the common ground that people should know. And what is the problem in status quo? The problem that is apparent in the status quo is on the idea that this is a highly diverse country. That means first, society, especially women, exists in a spectrum. In example, in terms of their background, cultural relation, economic background, etc. And second, these women often face discrimination on the very basic ground. For example, being assaulted, their right being limited, their voices are less heard out by society. We think such things are a more common issue that women in general face, especially in a highly diverse country. We ought to focus on this due to the fact that it will bring a much more powerful message through the relatability that these women have between each other rather than focusing on the intersectionality. Why is it necessary to fix the problem? We think that it is crucial to first raise the awareness upon these individuals regarding the common ground of what women generally face in a country. Why is the problem urgent? The problem with intersectionality is that even though we do agree that every woman's oppression is indeed legitimate, but in order for us to be able to garner support for these intersections, the very basic fundamental point or the prerequisite relies on the common ground that at least all women in that country will be able to relate to each other for what they have faced as women in general. So what do we mean by diverse countries? Diverse countries are the countries that have significant cultural, religion, ethnic, linguistic, and racial diversity. Oftentimes, women in diverse countries will potentially face things like discrimination, sexism at a very basic level. We think this is something that women face in general. For example, things like discrimination, sexual assault, domestic violence, and etc. Hence, it is important to focus on the commonality as the fundamental keys in this country. So what is commonality? Commonality refers to the focus on the common experience of discrimination faced by women. This means that feminists will prioritize the ways in which all women are affected by gender discrimination regardless of their backgrounds or identities. We think it is also important for us to analyze the inherent interest of feminist movement. First, we think that one, feminist movement has the agenda to represent women holistically, even if it is being represented from the first and second wave of feminism that promote women rights in general. Notice that even feminism establishes a common standing ground to ensure that people are aware and basically women are aware about the general oppression that they face in the current society. And second, commonality also in lines with the interests of feminist movement because first, commonality makes women feel more sense of solidarity because of relatability with each other. For example, women face same struggles like sexual harassment, unfair salary, etc., regardless of their diverse background. And second, it allows for a more inclusive and diverse representation of the feminist movement, especially those women whose experience is unique and not often be advocated. And with moving on to our our stance. We think on our side it is clear, which is that first we want people to be aware of the root of the problem, which is from the oppression women face in the very first ground. We think it is important to establish awareness as a form of performative action, so that people are aware of the problem that women face generally. And second, we think that the fight of intersectionality can linger once there is already a strong establishment of the awareness in the common ground first. And what does our mechanism look like? We will actively spread the narrative using social media, PSA, and etc. about gender oppression, how to react to them, what to do when we witness it, so the public will be well informed. And going to my argument, my first argument is the prerequisite of feminist movement start from the common ground. What is the women in this highly diverse country will see commonality as the basis of fighting against the rooting discrimination that is happening in their country. This is true because the fact that through commonality we can first establish the fact that every woman faces the same problem of discrimination just because they are women. With the establishment of the same problem or issue that they face, we think it is more likely for women to garner support from other women, given that the fact they have experienced the same issue in their life. And second, through commonality, it establishes the fact that women in general share the same life experience, which makes it possible for them to be able to stand for each other, given that they share the same relatability through the experience that they face. What is the benefit of reliability? 2 points here. First, relatability means women will feel like they are the victim of the system. It will eventually create collectivization through the common ground that they establish together. This is beneficial for feminist fights in order for them to be able to garner followers that will eventually support the movement. And second, they feel connected with each other compared to government side. When through intersectionality, one woman will not suddenly be aware of the other woman's experience simply because this is a highly diverse country, meaning that the amount of diversity in terms of women also do exist, and they don't always share the same life experience. We're extremely proud.
Thank you for that speech. We welcome DPM here.
Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Okay. I'm starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I'm not exposed with the issues of gender pay gap, not until I joined the debate club and do method bank upon feminisms and their struggles and how women are unable to get a same and equalized pay gap, and even countries developed as US even have still experienced the things. Even though my mother itself is also works and employed, and somehow she also got that some kind of treatments, and she doesn't even understand upon the issues and not even try to do so, since she's still not getting the bigger umbrella upon the organizations in itself. It shows how the struggles are never getting carried on by this feminist movement at the end of the day. That is why we really want to create this kinds of intersectionality upon acknowledging the issues about how women in low class standards will still get being included in the kind of the discourse in itself. But before moving to my substantive, I'm going to give several rebuttals towards the side of oppositions. Firstly, the moment they talk about how commonality is something that will be built off towards the feminist movement itself, we feel that this is actually a lie. At the very start, we know we have to acknowledge that I cannot relate with those with Miranda Forbes at the end of the day, because she's a philanthropy who happened to be like a billionaire's ex-wife and also got to like support women's schools in Africa. Meanwhile, most of us are more likely just a mediocre women who wants to create a support towards this feminist feminist movement that don't know how to channel to at the end of the day, right? That is why more likely who became the leaders of this feminist movement are persons with capitals, a person who had times, a person who has a power, and a person who get it back up at the end of the day. They had a strong will to help, but they don't know how to channel their how they are going to channel their help to they don't know how to channel their aids at the end of the day towards those kinds of movements, since they always trying to like rock off and like hiding off the whole kind of like intersectionality that is happening, and in that they're only focusing upon the upon certain issues at the end of the day, right? But we feel that the sad things is this is the moments we are not trying to expose the issues. They are not going to create a targeted campaigns, which something that is needed by these women at the end of the day, right? There are several there are women in low class standards that wants to get the help on how they need to work over tomorrow, since they cannot do since they will never getting chosen by the laborers, or like because they are always prioritizing men, things like that. These are the moments we are going to still maintaining this kinds of like prioritizations over commonality. These unincentivize them to join over this movement or even support it. Moreover than that, we also realize that how the narratives over saying that who hurt woman is even the other woman is a really strong, is getting really strong when you try to hide this intersectionality narrative at the very first place. Just look into how the issues of like whether or not feminist movements are agree on supporting prostitutes or women who sexualize their body on the idea of creating a profit. More likely the one that gives such a cynicals and criticisms are the women itself, because they feel like, well, they are going to like make our bad reputations, they are going to create such bad narrative at the end of the day. Things like that are just getting a discourse that getting prolonged the discourse and getting prolonged the struggles that they actually had. Having this intersectionality at least going to acknowledge that these peoples are also struggling. Women from low class are unable to get and feed their own self at the end of the day, and the moment this happen, they need to work on, and they cannot do like just being criticized and cannot actually only criticize them for far too long. Like that is why we believe that the moment you are going to make this the intersectionality narratives will be prioritized, I believe that it would create it would create a way more targeted campaign rather than now. But secondly, the moment they say that, well, we are going to actually ignore how if we then ignore the sexual assault things, since we have to focus on the idea of intersectionality and things like that. Three response in here. Firstly, we believe that the feminist movement in itself are still want to like protect women in any kind of way. They are going to still rent a lawyer. They will going to work in such divisions where those women who works in the law works and cooperate with the law in itself, and the academia, they will still works and giving aid towards the idea of like sexual assault and things like that. They would make such a research and how to prevent that, things like that would necessarily still be going to like works on by the feminist movement. But secondly, the issues of sexual assault are inherently becoming the general issues, right? Where even non-feminists in itself will agree that such an actions are something that is bad. That is why the society will still condemn in any way that they are that the society even trying to like call out and oppress the officials in itself, government, judiciary, everyone's in the law in itself. They try to pass the law. The one that works on it is not only feminism in itself, but more there are a lot of men who actually giving such a comment in Twitters and makes them held accountable the perpetrators who held the sexual assault cases at the end of the day, right? Means that these kinds of cases are getting a general one, which means this would create this shows how feminist movements are able to split their focus and do a priority and do a prioritizations and a programs towards the intersectionals one, since it's becoming inclusive towards their own issues at the end of the day. The one that knows them so much are this feminist movement. But thirdly, even if there will be several groups inside the feminist movement in itself, that it creates the narrations of the narrative of how there will be groups under the groups in itself who does not take priority over these issues, that's okay. They had a struggle they should work on. Labor are these feminist movement who works basis on the labors are getting pay gap and never promoted by the superiors, that's okay for them to not be like relate so much with the whole idea of getting sexual assault or things like that, since what feminist movement want is creating a secure net, a safety net towards these labor women, that their struggles are real, that their struggles are not something that people should be deprioritized, that people should be ignored, since this is what happened for far too long, right? But moving to my substantive, talking about how it actually create a transfer knowledge process, the moments we are acknowledging the intersectionality that happening in our world. Acknowledging the intersectionality will help this feminist movement to be more inclusive towards the women that they are working for, towards the member that becoming towards the one that becoming their members. They would create such a kind of like program seminars on how to create a micro business for women to actually do the things that they are passionate about. That is why they could that is why they could profit things from that skills that they had, things like that. This will be able to create a transfer knowledge process where those women who had capitals, where those women who had like times and a lot of powers could be able to channel their things into those women who are just basically unfortunate at the end of the day, right? This will be better for the creations of the programs we're proud to propose.
Is it my internet or is she cut off?
She finished her speech.
Oh, okay. All right, then. Thank you for that speech. We welcome your Deputy Leader of Opposition here.
Can someone from the front hear audible? Please, madam. Number first. All right, I'm back. Gender pronouns she or her. I think just that because there's a POI here. I'm sorry if it's so noisy in the background noise, or whatever it is. What an optimistic and idealistic case from the proposition side, but the unfortunate thing, simply they just neglect and cannot have a better mitigation to a certain area where on the extreme level women are still the victim of the marginalization. Judges, listen to us. Now to the setup. As the pre-comparison, how the rest of their case will look like based on the first speaker and the second speaker framing. Now, from the first speaker, their framing relies on the people, the understanding the general term, while they are also aware that this issue is a systemic problem. The counter framing of this idea is that it is a systematic problem. So putting this in a general term, where we all know even the proposition side itself has that. Proposition side itself, every issue as it has different approach and way to solve. I will tell you why about the further elaboration. Now, B, due to the analysis, their case will play on the ideal idea that people will eventually understand. The thing they miss is that the diverse country tends to be more conservative. Noticing that this is a massive logical fallacy from the proposition side, it will be integrated in my argumentation. Now, moving on to my rebuttals. This is so minimal. They either way, the rest of their case is false because number one, they said about their fear when they said it, if this issue issue on the opposition side will be just a common thing and not everyone will eventually understand about what is going on. We think this is a false idea because number one, simply why then this is an issue because there is an elaboration, there is some kind of there's a understanding on the bottom line level about what is going on and the status quo. And the second one is that women from the lower class are unable to help themselves, means that there will be no help for these women, let's just say the victim. This is a false idea because think about it. Why they are still being a victim simply because they are helpless, they are clueless, they're oblivious about what is going on. The proposition framing and stance is just the same as us, but judges, the thing you need to consider is the likelihood of this proposal will pass, right? Now, secondly, they say how feminists want to create safety net that no one should be ignored. Three responses here. No, few responses here. Number one, we think that women through commonality will even be represented better due to the fact that the problem faced by them is going to be general and something that women will face in women face in commonality. Second, exactly because feminists want to create a safety net, they should be able to holistically represent what women have faced currently. We think proposition fail to prove this when they don't create any necessary measure as to how the awareness of society will happen, and basically on the collectivization of women to form a strong movement. And lastly, comparatively, which will be more integrated in my argument later, we create a better collectivization through reliability and connectivity. Now, moving on to my argument. My argument is about pushing the idea of intersectionality will not likely, no matter what the mechanism are coming from the proposition side, and even it will still cater and mitigate by our side. Now, this argument contains 3 points. Number one, take a look back on what status quo looks like, means that re-establish the problem that failed to be identified by the proposition side. Second, on actor analysis, how will this impact the people, the vulnerable actor, which is the lower class society that still don't understand about the idea and gender oppression, especially women that still marginalized in the status quo. And second, and thirdly, the comparatively on how our world will look like versus their world. Now, the first argument, take a look back on the status quo. In a highly diverse country, people are living together with different backgrounds and different backgrounds in different perspectives, right? That's why in the society itself, there are some norms or rules that are established in the society. Noticing the case coming from the proposition side means that they want to push the idea of intersectionality and establish this as a new norm to help the society living a better life where there will be no gender oppression and so on. But notice that on the bottom line, when the people at the beginning are aware and understand the why question of the new norms, which is the intersectionality, we think it depends on it is depend on our case. That's why the prerequisite of this debate is it's on our side. We win this debate. Now, on actor analysis, how will this impact the people, the vulnerable actor, and so on and so forth? Noticing that this debate runs in a very diverse country where it's a true fact that people, especially women, women's understanding about this issue is still low. Let's think about this. There is some women that are working but still a victim to the gender oppression, and so on and so forth. Even if they're already being a part of the feminist community, they're still part of the gender oppression. Now, choosing the idea of intersectionality will still not happen and will not likely and a proposition how you respond to this case. Now, due to this analysis, we provide to you why the commonality is the first thing that we need to urge in this debate. Why is this important? First, we never say that we will reject the idea of intersectionality since the beginning, but what we want people on the bottom line should understand first what is the issue, why the issue is considered as an issue, how to cope with the issue, how to react when we're the witness of that issue, etc. Especially for women that are still marginalized on the status quo. Second, this is important because if on the bottom line we can put awareness as the foundation of this intersectionality, now the proposal from the proposition side will be applicable, but it's now the proposal coming from the proposition side will be applicable. But notice that the lack of analysis and even a lot of loophole coming from the proposition side make the case will be likely from the people that live in the top layer of the society itself. Now, means that it will be applicable to the people that live in the big city, or let's just say living in a place that has been exposed with outside culture. Judge, noticing this analysis, even a big city that has been exposed to other cultures or the outside world is a place that has its own hegemony. They have their own pattern of living that is significantly different from the diverse country we propose to you. Hence, the proposition case is out of this debate. Given that the analysis of this intersectionality will become a norm, it will be more likely to take the proposition case if we establish our case first at the bottom line. Just like the other norms example, like treat others with respect, it's just not the basic morality, but it's already established as a society because they understand that if you want to be treated politely, you should start not behaving politely too, simply being careful with your words and how you talk to others, and so on and so forth. Comparatively, in our world, we are more than confident to propose to you that the idea of intersectionality will be achievable if you take our case first, judge. The proposition will push this notion, simply they will neglect that there will be a possibility where this intersectionality won't be applicable on certain area. But on our side, we already established it to you that we want to approach it as to the bottom line first. We want to approach it as the so the people will feel familiar with it first, and so on and so forth. But on our side, we want to make this issue as a common thing, which is again about the awareness by the mechanism. By the awareness of the mechanism we already proposed to you. In terms of magnitude of impact, we can cater major impact because in the bottom line itself, the people perception about the gender oppression and women itself will be slowly but surely changed to the way we as the proposition and opposition side wants. What kind of the impact on the proposition side? Simply they'll just focus on the narration that reason why women are still multitasking, being a businesswoman and employee and even labor is and still doing domestic job. That's it. They will just understand that. While we're judging this, analyzing on the root that this narration is still, it's because the people still believe that it is okay for women to work as long as they take care of home and family too. We all agree that the domestic job is a basic life skill, right? That's the thing we want to push in this debate. Not like the proposition side that will just focus on the top layer and the issue cannot even reach the root. We are very proud to oppose.
All right, thank you for that speech. To follow that up, we welcome Goffwith here.
Am I audible? Okay. Audible gak sih? Am I audible?
Yes, audible. You're audible.
Okay, sorry, it's raining cats and dogs here.
Audible.
Setting up my timer first. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Member of the House, we're going to be the first team that gives you a realistic point of view on how the world looks right now, because we think that oppositions of the House is currently living in a really utopic world in which we don't know how their case is going to happen, and etc., and how their mechanism will then work. There's no clear analysis on how it's going to happen. But firstly, I'm going to give like a really quick response towards the case of opposition that say things like, oh, at the end of the day, common grounds is being used to tackle things like sexual assault, for example, or tackle things or tackle this kind of like more general things, and etc. We think that we can dismiss that from this debate, because why? Because there is already a systemic effort in order to try to solve that problem. Things like judiciary and laws and etc. are trying to force this and trying to stop the sexual assault at the end of the day, right? Corporations right now have already this kind of like regulations that makes like woman quota, for example, and etc. So we think that feminism comes into exclusivity in this debate when trying to tackle more specific complex problem, and this is exactly how our stance takes in part, and this is exactly how we should debate this at the very first place. So I'm going to structure my speech around clashes. All rebuttals will be integrated. First clash is like creating a better understanding for the feminist society. Secondly, we're going to talk about like achieving the objective of the feminist movement at the very first place. What are the comparatives will look like in both sides of the house? Firstly, creating a better understanding for the feminist society, right? So the biggest question mark for the side opposition is that how things are going to change in their side, right? There are no mechanism whatsoever in which this problem is most likely rooted in a more specific community, and how this like problems cannot be generalized because it will look different from one community to one another. So they say that every single problem comes from a more settled common ground. Opposite that, but at their case, at the end of the day, when you're saying the same common grounds, it still look different in real lives. So what does this look like? Firstly, women from middle upper class may face inequality, but what they face is like inequality at work, where they cannot face their bosses and cannot get promotions because they are women. But the comparative looks like for like a more smaller community, inequality looks like people that cannot go to higher education because they don't have because people told them that women doesn't deserve this kind of like high quality educations and etc. So one terms which is like inequality can look really different in the two worlds, in which that upper middle class society and also lower class society. So this is exactly the kind of world that the opposition side tried to neglect. So what does this imply, right? We think that this negligence of trying to generalize all women complex problems are really, really harmful. Let's try to engage, right? The solutions that you are going to make in order to solve the inequality problem is not going to be well targeted when you're trying to just generalize it all, right? Because at the end of the day, it will not solve the problem at all. So why is that? Because the face of feminism right now lies on a more upper middle class woman problems, people that actually has the time to advocate that problems and have capitals and have the channels and etc. People that remains low or remains lower class that have like that face a more like complex issues and etc. They don't have the channel, they don't have the capital, hence their problems are going to just be conserved in a very, very long time, makes it prolonged. But why is that really happen, right? We're going to give you 3 structural reasons. Firstly, some women focus on classic feminism goals when they're busy worrying about more urgent problems like their work, their livelihood, their daily lives. And a lot of these problems aren't shared by the whole of feminist movement, right? So even to keep going, even to assure their life still going from day-to-day basis is something that these smaller women have in mind. These are their focus. And this is exactly why they cannot feel like they fit in classic feminism, right? And second reason, because at the end of the day, because these women like rely so much at their works, for example, they're just so scared to voice their problems. Because why? Because they are scared to losing their jobs. At the end of the day, they're scared to confront their bosses. They're scared to confront their like maybe parents, for example, not getting them to higher quality education. Because why? Because they are scared of because they are scared at the end of the day they will have to they will be expelled from the house, for example, and all of those kind of like problems. So because these women are so scared, they're scared to voice their problems. At the end of the day, femininity will not then giving solutions to this woman. But thirdly, right? So now, so what will happen in our side of the house when we're acknowledging this more smaller woman, giving the voice to them, more likely for them to be emotionally safe here, more emotionally safe here in feminism community, right? Because why? Because they feel like they're actually acknowledged that their problems are valid, and this is exactly how our case becomes exclusive. We're trying to gather more women with complexities of their problems and try to advocate it to people that may have the power to change it, right? So these problems are addressed correctly. Like what? Things like firstly, things like advocating education's right, and actually talking to the religious leaders, for example, about giving the same equal chance to women, to supporting women to get good education will happen in our side of the house. Let's give it comparative towards the case of opposition side, right? They're only giving mechanisms like PSAs. They're only going to give mechanisms like campaigns that they set like in social media, for example. Well, at the end of the day, it will not reach out these groups at the very first place because they don't even have the channel to understand. They don't even have the channel to to get exposure of these resources, and they will at the end of the day will just ignore it because it is something that is so radical from what they experience from day-to-day life, right? So we have really clear comparatives and also mechanism how then intersectionality is going to be better for this woman that have more complex problems, and also how they will create more emotionally safer in the feminism community, and also more hand-to-hand helps that is coming from the inner feminism community in and on itself. So what does this imply? The search of common ground is really not there, because at the end of the day, common ground common ground doesn't exist, right? Because things are more complex than you think. So there will be no structural change that is coming from the opposition side of the house. We win on the first clash. Secondly, let's talk about like achieving the objective of the feminist movement at the very first place. Khansa has already told you really clear about like how women having a bad sentiment to other women are still happening in oppositions of the house, and there are no engagement whatsoever. Narratives of people that works in like narratives of people that like sexualize their body for profit and etc. When they actually have to feed their children and etc. It will still not be solved, because at the end of the day, bad sentiments will happen to this to this woman. And then at the end of the day, because why? Because they don't understand the root cause of why this woman works like that for the very first place, right? Criticism against women inside of the womanhood community, feminism community, and etc. will still be prolonged. It will be so bad in their side of the house. So what does this imply? It will going to be a prolonging harm going for the opposition side of the house. There will be no, chain of reactions will not be stopped. We have already proven to you how it's going to be exclusive. Vote for negative side. Thank you. Positive side.
Yes, thank you for that speech. To close the substantive part of the debate, we welcome Opwip. Here.
Am I clearly audible?
You're audible.
Thank you. I go by she, her pronoun, and yeah, setting up my timer. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. We think essentially, Gov side fails to understand the main agenda or interest of feminist movement. If we can prove to you why through the very first establishment of feminist movement, they are focused on the commonality as a powerful weapon for them to stand as a movement, we win this debate. This is true simply because of the ways that feminism has fight for. Number one, the first way of feminism where women focus on legal inequalities or formal inequalities, especially voting rights and property rights. And the second wave was in the 1960s or the 1980s, where women's movement went beyond formal legal inequality to focus on a more informal cultural inequality. And then lastly, on the third way of feminism, which is where the intersectionality of feminism and post-colonial feminism and also postmodern feminism comes after that. This then proves to you why on the basis or on the ground of feminist movement, it should focus on the commonality. Even if side up, we respond to this by saying, oh, it is time for women to focus on intersectionality. But notice, not every country move in the same progress. Given that this is a highly diverse country, we think that it is still very crucial for us to focus on the fundamental values of feminism first, in order to first raise the awareness of the individual. Secondly, to educate people on the common ground so that people won't be flooded with issues that they don't even have basic information in the first place. But B, when we're talking about intersectionality, we should agree on the basic ground that these general issues or problems that women face will be the same. Things like discrimination, domestic violence, sexual assault is something that women until now still suffering from. Within that, you cannot just say or focus on further intersectionality when the very basic problems cannot be resolved at the end of the day. With that said, I'm going to respond to government with these two independent responses. Firstly, they say how systemic measures have existed in terms of regulation on sexual assault. Two responses here. Number one, we question then to what extent this regulation are effective without feminist movement as a strong movement to promote the idea of commonality and to raise the awareness. But secondly then, even it is worse on your side, because currently even law and regulation cannot be relied upon. We often see news saying how instead of punishing the perpetrator of the sexual assault, rape or whatsoever, the perpetrator is freely released and the victims do not get necessary equal retribution. So we question the effectiveness of the law and regulation they try to bring here. So when this basic or the bare minimum cannot be digested by society, we think feminist movement is ought to focus on a very basic root or the common ground of to educate and raise awareness of the people. Secondly then, they say how we generalize complex problems. Two responses here. Number one, we think that the word generalizing is just not the right word to describe our case. Essentially, we think instead of generalizing complex problem, we stand on the ground that women currently face, which is A, the discrimination that is highly rooted in a problem, but B, to be able to garner support or collectively from women. Secondly though, the problem with prop side is that there's a collective action problem where women won't have the urgency to collectivize due to them having no relatability to stand on an equal ground. As up, we promote to you the idea of marching together. Together we are the victims and we should fight for the system and we should voice out our matter. This is something that we can champion as up. But thirdly, then they say how they're going to prolong the suffering of the intersectionality by we focusing on commonality. Number one, we think that this claim is simply wrong because we're not going to neglect it. We think that how when you focus on commonality and people have the same equal standing ground, the problem of intersectionality can then lingers. But the problem on their side that they do not establish the very common ground where people can agree upon, which I think this is the problematic message that's coming from side Gov. And that's why I'm going to talk about two issues mainly in this space. Number one, on better women participation, and secondly, on better women protection. First issue then on better women participation. Observation number one, they say with intersectionality, at least we are going to acknowledge that these people are actually struggling. Two responses here. Number one, we agree and we do acknowledge that this type of suffering exists. But what is problematic on prop is that they fail to analyze the potential solution to cover this problem. Yes, we agree on prop that they will acknowledge, but so what? Simply acknowledging is the bare minimum. But the problem on Gov is that they won't be able to create any further action due to A, society still having no awareness and basic education regarding the root problem of the issues. But B, women themselves as the actor will not have the same standing ground on garnering and supporting and also marching with the movement because they don't share the same relatability. This is the problem that is left unengaged on site Gov. But secondly then, even if yes, that we are still going to acknowledge the different suffering that women face, but within the interest of these women is to at the very least get better protection in terms of A, sexual discrimination that basically they will face not only a private paradigm but also in the working place, but B, sexual assault that mostly every woman has ever faced, getting catcalled and getting touched without their consent is something that is still very common to happen within women. But C, the domestic violence that is still faced by most women, regardless whether they have power or not. We think that this is something that commonality will stand for compared to side prop when they simply say they want to acknowledge different suffering without them analyzing the potential and the existing threats that harms women's rights. So we ought to prioritize what is the most tangible harm that has been posed to women, and we ought to focus on fixing that issues first. Observation number two, then, additionally, you should not predict the substantive coming from DPM on the transfer of knowledge and basically their benefit of campaign, because we think that the prerequisite for this benefit to manifest is when A, women are able to garner support because they feel like the sense of relatability together. Notice that in their 24-minute speech, we don't hear any responses on the relatability and connectivity of these women as the prerequisite of collectivization. We also don't think that these women will simply want to march in the street when they do not relate to the other women's life experience. So, Judge, what is the most likeliest scenario that happened on their side is that number one, either women won't collectively support the movement due to different life experience and they do not share any common relatability, or B, even if women do march, do garner the support, it is not going to send a strong or powerful message because only some amount of women will march to the street, and that's why we think that the urgency of that when we can garner more support and when women can actually collectivize together. But also the problem on their side is that when they are trying to picture our side by saying how we are going to provide a more general term, it creates the notion and it only creates one solution to all problems. We think this is not problematic at all, simply because number one, even if we are actually creating the general term, at least that general term can eventually manifest into people getting aware. At least we don't want to flood people or society with a massive amount of issues that they do not even understand the very rooted or the very basic problem to it. On our side, we are able to create the notion that instead of you focusing on a lot of issues that you do not relate into, you should at least focus on these common issues that is still very urgent, that is still faced by the women itself. But also secondly, they say how on their side that they are going to create a targeted campaign. Within targeted campaign can only manifest when first women is able to gather together and march together in the street when they're able to see the possible fights that they can fight for and the campaign that is more targeted to a society instead of them without any knowledge of which women share the same experience. I think it is far harder for these women to actually march in the first place. So we think that at the end of the day, what our side proves to you is that on the prerequisite, we prove to you the prerequisite of a movement to be successful is when the followers or the people inside of the movement is able to share the same relatability. We do acknowledge that the importance of intersectionality is indeed important, but what Prof or basically Gov failed to analyze at the end of the day is on why then, absent of the prerequisite, all of their benefit can eventually manifest without them having to garner the support or basically the collectivization of women in general. So with the end of the day, we win by 2 points, which is one, in terms of the participation of women, we at least can increase a more participation in terms of women can able to share the same experience, and also secondly, in terms of the protection, we can even create a better safety net and a better, safer place for women to be able to share all of their experience, to share all of the problems that simply face at
they simplify and basically their whole life experience. So for those reasons, we think that op side is op side is going to win this debate. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech. To close the case from op, welcome op reply. You're here.
I'm still audible, right? All right. Okay. Judge, when you want to assess this debate, I will tell you how. Listen to us. What the proposition side did wrong in this debate. Number one, the proposition side characterization of gender inequality is too simplistic. The moment they said that what kind of gender equality looks like on their side is when women cannot get education. Judge, this is a questionable claim because this is not relevant. In status quo, women are able to get well educated. Women are still able to get work, to get the work, their dream job or whatsoever it is. If they want to push this idea, they should have give the real example rather than being cherry picking like that. Number two, they want to gather women with different issue from different perspective and blah blah blah. We think this is also problematic simply because of the likelihood of their mechanism is not likely. Noticing that they say they will have an audience with the religious leader, or let's just technically speaking, they are directly aiming to the high stakeholder of this issue. Whilst on our side, it has already been established that the importance of is on the basic understanding of the people. That's why we were proposed the mechanism. Okay.
Sorry, I was kicked out, I think. Hello?
Hello.
Op reply? Yep.
Okay, can you hear me now clearly?
I stopped the timer at... Yes, I can hear you clearly. I stopped the timer at around 1:15. Is it the same on yours?
Yes, but let me just repeat that from the beginning because ini masih
Okay.
okay.
Masih apa?
Ini masih awal banget, so I will just restart it. Are you fine with that?
Ya udah, okay. Yeah, sure.
Okay, I will restart this bit, ya. Judge, when you want to assess this debate, I will tell you how. Listen to us. And what the proposition side did wrong in this debate. The proposition side characterization of gender inequality is too simplistic. The moment they said that what kind of gender equality looks like on their side is when women cannot get education, women cannot get the job they always dream of. The women cannot have some kind of freedom of speech or whatsoever it is they're proposing. This is a questionable claim because this is not relevant. In status quo, women are able to get well educated if they women are able to get well educated. Women are able to get their dream job their dream job and whatsoever it is. If they want to push this idea, they should have give the real example rather than being cherry picking like that. Second, they want to gather women with different issues from different perspective and blah blah blah. We think this is also problematic simply because the likelihood of their mechanism are not likely. Noticing that they say they will have an audience with the religious leader, or let's just technically speaking, they are directly aiming to the high stakeholder of this issue. Whilst on our side, it has been established that the importance is on the basic understanding of the people. That's why we were proposed the mechanism are using the social media or actively spreading the narrative by using public service announcement or even advertisement services, which will be more likely because using this way, at least people will be exposed with the information. This is also by what we meant as a softer approach based on the relatability and reliability of the targeted audience itself. And at the end of the day, the feminists will get help from the society that are already aware with this issue. On their side, simply the feminists either when they want to make movement or even a targeted campaign, like they said, they'll just work alone. Hence, at the end of the day, the successful rate of their proposal is little, or let's just say none. Now, you must be tired of hearing the word prerequisite, because we keep repeating that. Okay, let me tell you, because that's the fact. Because that's the fact here. The prerequisite on their proposal is rely on our case, right? We already proposed to you what kind of world we are facing now, what kind of society we're facing now. Why then the feminists, either when they want to make a movement or even they want to make a campaign, they should be collaborated with the society. This is the thing that left untouched by this. But this is the thing that left untouched by the proposition side of the house. Therefore, they are out of this debate. Now, why we should win this debate? We prove to you on the urgency to educate people on the ground and for women to be able to listen to the same life experience, that all of them are victims of the system. That's why it is important for us to understand women should be able to understand first the fundamental fight of this movement. We march women and collectively support women as the victim, as the victim to be able to fight this issue, not to be able to fight this issue, and in the end of the day, in the end of the day, they will, or even let's just say the people, the women itself will eventually realize that, oh, this gender oppression or even this gender inequality can be can be looked like in every different shape, in every different movement, in every different month, and so on and so forth. Comparatively, on proposition side, they won't create necessary measure to help women. They'll just simply give it to you, just like, oh, this is this problem is like this problem is like this, and that there is a different approach to this, different way of solving problem. But guess what? There is no mitigation. They'll just focus on the how to solve the problem, but there is no mitigation coming from them. If the problem happening again in the future, they won't have the sufficient mechanism to gather women to support the movement. They also fail to prove why the intersectionality can directly translate to people understanding this issue when people are flooded with different issues. There is no further responses on the flooded information. Therefore, we win this debate.
Thank you so much for that speech. To close the debate, we welcome Gov reply right here.
Am I audible? Ini kedengeran kan?
Yes.
Okay. Going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. People living in a diverse country means they are actually familiar with the diversity itself, right? That's why having an intersectionality feminisms would not be something that is so new towards this woman's life at the end of the day. That is why we feel that these kinds of mechanisms to be applied on are highly likely to be manifested. But what is happening inside opposition is that they're trying to hide the issues that these women are struggle to, with the idea of how they create a commonality and force these women who feels that they are not necessarily feel like they are part of these issues in itself to be to join and celebrate the commonality at the end of the day. What we want to ridicule in this debate. Firstly, the moments oppositions worry that the commonality would not be accessed in our sites because women would not have the same same background and same ground to actually join with the movement. There is no motive, reasons, things like that. We feel that we have already explained about this since our first speakers, that we have told how they would join, not because they are trying to like collectively being so much carried with the issues of like sexual assault or things like that, but they are joining because they feel that they should have joins when the moment they are also struggling with the economic, when this feminist movement are trying to building up about the economics one at the end of the day, right? Because for far too long, feminist movement always standing up the issues about sexual assault, catcall. Meanwhile, much more of mediocre women are not even understands about these kinds of issues, and they are even and what's more worrying for them are more likely about the salary that is not enough to feed their own self. That is not enough to buy them luxury extra things that they want and they dream of at the end of the day. These struggles are never getting validated the moment feminist movement doesn't create this kind of intersectionality that we have already proposed since the very first place. That is why we feel that the idea of inclusivity would be more likely accessed in our sites, and the idea of how we are going to cater to more of more of diverse sections of women will be likely to be applied in our sites. But secondly, talking about how they are trying to say that, well, the idea of like sexual assault is that they could actually works the moments they are united, that their successful rate will be higher, things like that. When the moments they are also ignoring the fact that there are women that is struggling with their works, that is struggling with their struggling with how they are never getting promoted by their superiors. At the end of the day, we feel that the complexity of it, the complexity of ignoring these kinds of issues will send women are even going to like never feeling like they should have joined with the feminist movement in its very first place, because they feel like, well, feminist movement are very selfish, that they will just only think of about their own instead of like taking my struggle as something that is real and that is validated at the end of the day, right? We feel that we have already also explained why even at the very worst case that even we are not going to be united, like, well, there will be like separated groups under the same umbrella of feminist movement, even when these kinds of like labor feminists are not supporting the idea of like sexual assault or things like that, will still be okay in any way, because we feel that the idea, the main core one, was just going to create a secure net. That's what a feminist movement want to make, and we brought to.
All right. Thank you so much for that speech. And thank you so much for the debate. Please wait for around 15 minutes while me and my